Glad to see everybody here tonight. My name is Dave Waisman. I'd like to welcome you to the third annual Sunday evening program for the Westward Look Resort Show. We seem to have filled the place. To facilitate tonight's program, I'd like to introduce someone who many of you know. Please welcome warmly Mr. Steve Smale.
Okay, so let me read this statement I gave to all these participants a few weeks ago, just to let us all know where we're going, and I'll do the same for you. The golden age of minerals is a topic, and my statement or my question are around this. At the end of the 1960s and the 1970s, there was a great rise in appreciation of fine minerals, with a corresponding dramatic rise in prices. To understand this important historical period for mineral collecting, let us address these questions. I asked these questions to the panelists to address. What was happening? And why? How? Okay, so now the structure of the panel. Before I introduce these panelists, each panelist will have 8 minutes to present a statement, which is to address perhaps in some broad sense what I've just said. Let's say 40 minutes for these statements. Then there'll be a period of up to a maximum of 20 minutes for rejoinders by members of the panel to each other. And so that will be finished by less than 1 hour. And after that, the whole subject is opened up to a dialogue between the panelists and the audience. That's the program. The audience is encouraged not only to ask questions, but to make statements. And in that period especially, I will ask everybody to try to be brief, including the panelists. Okay, and I hope that the panelists' initial statement will limit themselves to 8 minutes, partly out of just fairness to the other panelists. Okay, let me now say who these are. Well, maybe I better sit down to be heard. Here's Dave Wilbur. Hello. He's playing a second role as my advisor as I proceed, sitting next to me. Pete Bancroft. Charlie Key. Bill Larson. Ed Swoboda. And now the speakers will be speaking in order, starting with Dave and proceeding one at a time through these 5 people. We are ready for you, Dave.
Thank you. I want to thank you very much. I'm so impressed with this crowd. You can almost say it's who's who in the mineral hobby here tonight. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I'm going to show some slides of specimens I picked up since 1960. And these are some nice minerals to very, very fine minerals. Unfortunately, I don't have them all here because I have these slides are very old, and I have a good share of them. So if we can have the projector turned on and the lights off. These first 2 slides you're going to see here are my mentors from early days. Paul Desautel's, this is 1967 at the Tucson show with his case of magnificent miniature minerals. Paul Desautel's and John White helped me tremendously in the beginning. And he's holding a kermesite here, a commengite from the Sorbonne Museum, the world's finest commengite. But these 2 gentlemen were a big help in answering all questions about mineral collecting, and I learned so much from these 2 people. This is my first mineral case at a mineral show, a public showing, 1960 Eureka show. and American Federation and California Federation combined. Now you'll notice a lot of these minerals may look very ordinary, but back in those days, these specimens were considered very, very fine to extraordinary. Some of them are just very common today. This is not a common mineral. This is a mineral mimetite from Namibia, formerly Sumeb. This is from Charlie Key. And as I show these specimens, I'm going to mention where they came from and the person I got them from. And the people here on this panel are my good friends, and they were extremely instrumental in getting this collection together. So all these people on this panel here furnish these collections. So this mimetite is a killer mimetite. It's from Charlie Key.
Big.
Size, that was about a 3.5-inch specimen with a 2-inch clear crystal. 35,000, and this was about 1973. This is an azurite from Chessy, France, from Charlie Key. Killer on matrix, perfect specimen. That's about 3 inches, the specimen. This is a multicolored tourmaline on quartz crystal from Charlie Key on a large quartz crystal. The specimen's about 8 inches tall. The tourmalines are about 3.5 inches. Sarandite from Mount St. Hilaire. Very fine gemmy single crystal, razor sharp and in top color. This picture really doesn't do it justice, a true salmon color. Proustite from Peter Bancroft's collection. When I bought his collection in 1974, record price paid for a collection, $400,000, and it consisted of 52 specimens. That was a 2 3/4-inch crystal. Rose quartz on a large smoky quartz, about 10 inches high, very large specimen, magnificent thing, from the Bancroft collection. Phenosite, 4 inches by 3 inches, from the Bancroft collection from Brazil. Very rare. There's only 2 of them like this type, one in the Smithsonian, this one. The famous Bancroft rhodochrosite from the Sweet Home mine. This picture was taken in 1966 at the Las Vegas show, American Federation, California Federation combined. This was the ultimate rhodochrosite ever found. Today, some collectors still favor this specimen because of the magnificent rhodochrosite, about 4 inches, that sits right on top of the matrix, Bancroft collection. The famous morganite on BlueCap tourmaline from Bill and Ed Swoboda's tourmaline Queen mine, famous specimen. This specimen was sold to Keith. Keith sold to me. I sold back to Keith. Then it and it was $100,000, by the way. Originally, I believe it was $6,500. Then the piece went to Peter Via. Today, this thing is valued about $350,000. Famous morganite specimen from Norm Dawson's mine. Traded it for $735. Sold it for $26,000. Ed Sabot got it back for $6,500 from another collector. Went for $50,000. Then I sold for $75,000 when I sold the collection. Famous cactus tourmaline. Bill and I did a big trade. I believe this was sold to him for $18,000 from Potter's tourmaline Mesa Grande mine. Emerald from North Carolina. At the time, it was the largest specimen. I understand they found a larger one just about a month or 2 ago. A double terminated. This is now in the Smithsonian Institution. 4 inches long. Both crystals are double terminated. Fluorite from Illinois, Rosy Claire with snow calcite on it. One of my earliest specimens. All the rest of the specimens from miscellaneous dealers or collectors way back in the 50s. Azurite in these beautiful rectangular crystals, total floater except for a little piece of brown matrix at the bottom. It's totally complete all the way around. This went to me, to Keith Proctor. Originally came from Stan Alexander. famous bonitoite that is now in the LA County Museum, and it also belongs to the California Federation Show, and it's shown every year at the California Federation Show, and it's also permanently on exhibit at the LA County Museum. Two golds here called the Eagle and the others called the Rocking Chair. Very fine large crystals from California. Purchased these from Gordon McGinley in Yosemite National Park at Camp Curry. $22,000. One sold for $24,000. The other sold for $35,000. The Eagle sold for $60,000 in the Freilich sale collection. Platinum nugget from Peter Embry. I traded a Schneider Honite for that. 8-ounce platinum nugget. Very rare back in those days to get platinum nuggets out of Russia. 9-inch Legrandite. And I got this from Amesbury down in Loara, Mexico, and it's an extraordinary thing in the American Museum. And it's all well terminated. The termination part of it's above the ceiling there. Famous phosphophylite, 5 inches double terminated on matrix, largest, finest phosphophylite. This is in a private collection right now, and it's an extraordinary thing, and it was probably my most favorite mineral I've ever acquired. Dick Thompson, Paul Desautel, Uli Peterson, and John White. This is our trip to Europe, toured Europe together. This is at Copenhagen. Yours truly, Papua New Guinea, looking for gold on Mount Kari in Papua New Guinea. I had very little luck because they found $200 million worth of gold, and it was all melted down. It never got in the hands of the collector, and it was wonderful crystallized gold. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Next, Pete Bancroft speak.
Those of you in the audience are probably not hearing everything that's going on up here because we have 2 microphones and 5 people. But there are all sorts of excuses and backouts, and I just have to say, I don't know how these 4 guys got in here because let me finish. Because security was really bad with me, and here I am. I dislike talking about myself with the words I, me, my, and all that, but it's a little hard within 8 minutes not to include a few. And I need to explain that I had to work under conditions that fortunately most of these people did not have to work under. I was lucky. I had mineralogy in high school, junior college, and a number of collegiate courses. So I had some technical background, and we're a mining family to start with. But when it came time to leave my jobs of teaching and supervising school districts, I had to travel on a limited budget. I never had more than $10,000. And here's Dave. He's talking about 100,000, 50,000. He's one of the problems for me because I got a lot of money. I got a lot of money out of him, but it dissipated with a big family. There were some fabulous specimens that I came across, had a chance to buy, and didn't have the money. Probably the most famous one is the big kunzite in the Smithsonian Institution. It weighs close to 7.5 kilos, is essentially flawless. And I had a chance to buy that from Paulo Nercessian in Governador Valadares, Brazil, for $32,000. And that was a fortune for me. I couldn't do it. So there were good things that I missed. I didn't have the money. And then frequently I wouldn't have the time. I could get away a month from my job as a superintendent of schools, but I would have to leave when I'd hear about something in a mine and didn't get there. So all is not hunky-dory, but I had a great time. I'd like to just take one mineral that has been dear to my heart and let you know how sometimes trading and all this kind of monkey business helps out when you don't have hard cash. I was in Sumeb and then transferred by plane to Potosi, Bolivia. And I had lived in Bolivia for 2 years, and I wanted to work with a phosphophylite. And so I arrived not even dressed for the occasion. In Namibia, everything was hot, and I had a windbreaker, and that was the only thing that I could wear that was could stand the cold of 15,000 feet elevation in Bolivia. And I lived in this hotel for a week, talking to miners and passing the word. On the last day, I just froze to death the whole time. It was extremely cold. I talked to the lady when I finally caught up with her that was running the hotel and said, isn't there some way I can get a bath that's hot? I'm just cold. And she said, I can have that ready for you in a couple of hours. So I got into the tub and just turned it up as hot as I could. And then when I had finished, I roared down the hall, got into bed, and I said, this is it for me. I'm finally warm after a week. And just started to doze off, and there was a knock on the door. And outside were two miners, and I just wasn't even going to answer the door, but I finally did. And they came in, and they said, we have some phosphophylite for you. And right away, I was curious, and they kept bringing them out of their jackets and pockets. And finally, the table was pretty loaded with this stuff. And I was still having trouble with Spanish. I'd never been really good at it. And so they gave me a figure for the total, and I just said, I'm sorry, that's just beyond any hope that I have, because it was 2800. And I didn't have that kind of money after being in Brazil, but I miscalculated with my great Spanish, and it turned out to be $280 instead of, I almost talked myself out of that one. But anyway, I got this stuff, came home, and then went to the Las Vegas show. My son came rushing up and said, Dad, you've got to see the rhodochrosite that's on display. And so I looked across the hall, and sure, here was this thing, bright red. And I said, no, that's synthetic ruby. There's no known rhodochrosite like this one. So anyway, I finally talked to people. I talked to Paul Desautel and others. It was for sale for $7,500. And he couldn't raise the money. He said got some problems, as they frequently did. And no one else had bought it. And I finally had lunch with the owners and said, I can't buy this thing from you because I don't have $7,500, but I have a collection of phosphophylite. And if we can work out a deal, you pay my freight one way and I'll pay it the other between Denver and Los Angeles. And I'll trade you my phosphophylite collection for the rhodochrosite. So we did. We got them both on the table, all this stuff out there in this bright red crystal. And I finally got the crystal, and they were happy. I said, I think you're going to get a lot more than $7,500. And they, I think, got $1,800 for their phosphophylite, and today it would be worth far more. Anyway, the history, Dave came along and cleaned me out of some of my best minerals, and the rhodochrosite was one of them. And this fine piece is now in the museum at Houston. So that's just brief under the conditions that I worked, and I've thoroughly enjoyed meeting people like up here and many of you in the audience. It's a wonderful hobby, and you can do it if you don't have quite the money you need and quite the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Next speaker, Charlie Key.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charles Key, Charles Locke Key. Locke is in Ludlockite. Key is in Keyite.
Where's the hook?
Yes, you are our God.
I'm here to collect the first half of my 15 minutes of fame and share with you, fellow connoisseurs of fine minerals, some of my mineral experiences in Namibia, where I have a long history going back over 40 years. I would like to give you a short primer course, assuming that many of you don't know much about Namibia. Many of you do, but Most people I run into don't know anything about Namibia, don't know where it is, don't know how to pronounce it, have no clue of what it's like. So quick and dirty, everything here is going to be compressed to try and get it into 8 minutes. It won't work, but we'll do our best. Namibia is a smallish African country on the southwest quadrant of the continent of Africa. It's got about an 800-mile coastline with the Atlantic Ocean, has a border to the north with the Kunene River at Angola, has a border to the south with the Republic of South Africa on the Orange River, has a border to the east with Botswana, has a very tiny border on the very northeast strip that hangs off the northeast corner of the country with Zambia. It has a population of about 1.7 million people. It is ostensibly a democratic republic, but it functions like a tribal kingdom. It is, for all intents and purposes, a very dry, hot desert country with mountains throughout, savanna to the north, watery bits up in the very north and east. It is, by African standards, a very safe place, probably because it's empty. It is a very healthy place for the most part, probably because it's a dry country. Except for the very north in the rainy season where malaria is rife. That happens to be cerebral, drug-resistant, badass malaria. I live in a little town called Swakopmund, which is about mid-coast up the Namibian countryside. I have 600-foot sand dunes and mountains and cold Atlantic Ocean and lots of crayfish as my neighbors. And I'm very strategically placed for a lot of the minerals that come out of the country. But let's get right to the minerals because that's what this is about. Now what I've done here is compress a small list of mineral localities in Namibia that have produced either world-class or the very best of species minerals. This is probably omitting a good number of things, but it includes probably the most important things that this audience might be interested in. Obligatory, you must start with Tsumeb. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time with Tsumeb because I think a lot of you people have a pretty good fix on what comes from there and what can be coveted or desired from there, other than to say that there are probably several dozen species of minerals, most of which most of you would probably want a good specimen of, that come from there. And there is no mine ever in history that has produced anything even approximate to that. But it is, in fact, closed and underwater and, for all intents and purposes, finished for all times. One of the premier icons of Tsumeb is dioptase, and it has probably been knocked from its perch within the past 6 months by a new find of dioptase up in the Kokefeld. I won't go into detail here. If you want to discuss it further in the panels, fine and dandy. We can discuss it later. I would go immediately to Combat, which is near Tsumeb, still working, produces the world's finest, has produced the world's finest cerusites. Tsumeb lovers would probably say impossible, but the reality is 5 by 3 euhedrons of flawless cerusites that produce a magic show of optics are unquestionably the finest cerusites ever found anywhere, period. Combat also has to be mentioned for a relatively small mineral, but major big-time mineral in terms of color. It's the nambulites, maybe 6 crystals ever found in history, but they are the maximum color trip in a mineral, in a red mineral, red gem mineral. Never saw a perfect crystal. They don't get big, but they are awesome things. But they are unfortunately history. Next locality, again in the same immediate area, Baragocus. Baragocus is closed, but in my experience, the best smithsonites in the world come from Baragocus. Early workings, but if one were to have seen the finest 3.5 inch pin cushion clusters of deep pink scalenohedral smithsonites, or the big lime green transparent balls of smithsonites to 3 inches on cream dolomites, you would know you're looking at the world's finest smithsonites. You have to mention discloisite when you talk about Barragocus because they are the world's best, even though the probably 2 or 3 million specimens that have hit the market over the years are really uninteresting. But there's at least 10 or 20 discloisites that are mind-boggling things. They can be orange, yellow, plumose aggregates that go to 4 and 5 inches high. Brilliant, they're awesome, and they have no peer anywhere in the world. From Barragocus to Abinab, one of the other mines in the area, long since defunct, a vanadium lead zinc producer, produced the world's largest vanadinite crystals to 5 and 6 inches in some cases, usually not interesting because they are coated in discloisite for the most part, but occasionally a few escape the discloisite coating and they look for all the world red cloud wolfenite color and texture with cavernous terminations. I never saw a matrix specimen, but several of the single crystals are far and away the best vanadinites in the world. Zipping quickly to Ocaruso, a fluorite mine working at this very date. Mr. Chris Johnston, somewhere in the audience, has an exclusive permit to collect the place. Ocaruso is producing about 4,500 tons a month of fluorite that goes to Solvay in Belgium. And in that 4,500 tons of fluorite, there's probably anywhere from 10 to 20 crystals every month that are the equivalent of anything you would expect from China, Russia, Britain, wherever. How many of them get saved and where they go, that's another story. Most of the stuff from Ocaruso is just very nice, very interesting, good fluorite, not particularly interesting to this crowd. On from Ocaruso, we go to Brantberg and Gobobosed. These are 2 localities that are sort of joined at the hip and very significant contemporarily because they're producing amazing things. And there's a little confusion about the stuff that comes from there. It's notable primarily for amethyst scepters and phantoms and quartz crystal clusters. Smokies too, but the smokies that come from there can be eclipsed easily by Brazil, Madagascar ad infinitum. But the amethyst specimens at their best are astonishing. And I won't belabor it other than to say I think Mr. Marshall Sussman is going to put a case in this year. Is that right, Marshall? Are you here, Marshall? Are you putting a case in? Yes. Okay. Well, then I won't have to belabor it. He will confirm what I assert. Klein-Spitzkopf topaz. Best crystals of topaz in terms of complexity and sharpness for their size. The area's produced thousands of topaz over the years, most of them small, most of them uninteresting, but the best and the biggest are unique in the world. Irongo is a very active area right now. There's a lot of digging going on in Irongo by Damara diggers. They're finding superb aqua, tourmaline, mica, feldspar, the world's very best Davidite crystals. Ed David, are you here? And as recently as December, the world's very best metazonerite crystals. The best black tourmalines from here, which may in fact not be Sherrill, are without question some of the very finest black tourmalines. Turn your cell phones off. You got it? Amide, mile 72, the 2 localities in the world for blue Yermievite. Amide on the south flank of the Irongo Mountains produced fabulous blue Yermievites, sharper and brighter than anything from mile 72, maybe even a bit bluer in some cases. Some of these blue gem crystals have been cut to 7 carats, I believe, if my information is correct. Am I running out of time? Shut up, he says. Okay. I got to squeeze a couple more in. Marion Fluss Spessartine, the best in the world. Tubusus, Demantoid Garnets, the best in the world. Shut up. Okay.
How do you follow that? That was Charlie's infomercial.
So Bill's next. Thanks, Charlie. Bill, your turn.
I think I know everybody here. I know I'm the least here on the panel, but at least I'm not last, so that's going to be pretty good. I think mine's going to concentrate more on the people, because I think what happened in the 70s, and we're blessed with so many great people. I mean, it's been all over. I mean, obviously we were talking about what was the greatest time, and I mean, obviously when J.P. Morgan and George F. Coons were around, it must have been a great time, the golden years, and before that, but in the 70s, what I saw for the first time as a kid, and I met a lot of these guys when I was pretty young, and people were part-time mineral dealers for the most part. I don't know about Dick Bedeau's father. He might have been full-time, but I knew Norm Dawson. I knew so many people that had full-time jobs, and they were mineral dealers on the weekends or once a month. And in the 70s, as Desautel's told me, minerals follow money. And when the money came up, you started to get dealers become full-time. Now, I can go right across. I mean, Steve Smale was one of my best customers and friends, and we did exchanges. Dave Wilber is so important in my life, it's unbelievable, because he taught me what a great rock was. And Desautel's and Dick Bedeau would show me thumbnails that you could just go crazy over, Rock Courier. So it's the people, I think, that made the 70s marvelous. And I believe Pete Bancroft was like a legend for me. I mean, you never knew that you would meet him, and then it worked out that later we'll tell you about Ed, but he came to work with us. I mean, that was a tail wagging the dog, me trying to work with him. And I always wanted to be Charlie Key. I mean, he's just the most amazing person I've ever met. And Ed Swoboda is probably, besides John Sinkankus, who, God bless him, is no longer with us, and he took me to the Benitoite mine when I was 14 years old. And that was just so impressive. I mean, and John was my lifelong friend. He took care of me in ways that nobody else could. And Ed Swoboda is obviously the most important person in my life for the minerals, because he judged my thumbnails, and I'd won 4 times in a row, and a buddy of his beat me that year. So I went up at the Del Mar Fair and argued with him, and he said, let's start a business. And he made me believe in myself that I could maybe do it, and it's his genius, and he's obviously the greatest living field collector that I've ever known. I mean, unbelievable man. So he'll be telling you that. But when we started Pella, and I mean, I can look across the room. I mean, Ed talked somehow Buzz Gray into coming to work for us. I mean, what an amazing man he is, and he's in the audience, and he helped us start faceting. I mean, I didn't even know what a cut stone was, hardly. And we had to sell cut stones because we were mining, obviously, the Stewart mine. My dad helped him meet Monty Moore, and Ed had the brains to buy the mines and then release them to us, and then until we could buy them. And we worked from the Stewart to the Queen. And I mean, I remember the first BlueCap tourmaline in 1972, and you can read about it either in my story or Ed's. Mine's more accurate. It was written longer ago. Since Wendell was like going back and forth with us, and I said, we're both right, doesn't matter. So, but we found this first small crystal, which I think, oh my God, it was just so amazing to take your fingers across. I called Ed, he came down, and that's magic time. I mean, it took days and days. I dug the one that wound up in the Smithsonian, we never named our crystals, they always got named later, the candelabra. And I remember digging that at midnight with my father and finding the specimen, and the middle piece was missing. And we went through 18 inches of hard clay and quartz crystals and cutting our fingers, and I found the piece, and I knew it fit, and it sure did. And Ed came down the next morning, and he started digging, and we found, oh my goodness, he found the piece that I wound up with, and I found part of the rabbit ears, and he dug out the rest of the rabbit ears. I mean, it was just mind-boggling. And the famous Rock Courier where we screwed the morganite back on the tourmaline. So for me, what made the 70s great were the geniuses that I had the fortune to learn from. Desautel's another monster in my life. I mean, he was the best curator I ever knew. There was also an advantage that all of us had in seeing minerals, because museums used to be allowed to trade. And there are people who can criticize me for trading all they want. You can go to the museum, see what I traded them. They've stood the test of time. And they didn't ever get rid of their best in most cases. I mean, and they all come back to museums sooner or later anyway. In the long run, you have generous people like Gene Myron who donates all the time. And you look at Harvard, you see what they've got, and you'll understand. So, I mean, I can look through the whole room and realize from Bryant Harris, who helped us, we would never been able to do the Queen Mine if it wasn't for Bryant. And he did all the welding. I mean, you couldn't do it. I mean, you can't imagine all the things that it takes. So it really was the people of the 70s, and they're still here. And when they kept telling me, what about the golden age of the 70s? And my answer was, it's still here. It's still the golden age. It always is. You know, I was always told that if you'd only been here last week or last month, and of course I was always in Charlie's wake. I mean, he bought the Armievites, he bought the Memetites, he bought this. I got the leavings. It was still pretty good. But the people were magnificent. They're still here. You know, whether you got Campbell Bridges, you got a lot. So that would be my reasoning for the 70s being great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Hi, everybody.
Ed?
I'm supposed to be a recluse, so I'm kind of out of place here tonight, but I'll attempt to bring to you some of my thoughts on the minerals of the 70s. I feel that the golden age is possibly just continuing and even getting better now. And the rise in price is nothing new. That's been going on for a long time. And some of the factors that I'm sure all of you know or are aware of that make this a much more important event that we're involved in is the increase in perfection of extraction of these really fine minerals and their preparation, where perfect trimming and perfect cleaning make them just beautiful objects. They're art forms of nature, my opinion. And I think by this very means, they're becoming more attractive to people that had never even realized that they existed on our Earth. I'm mostly involved in my real excitement in life is discovering some locality where some mineral can be found in a dig that couldn't qualify as one of the best known. And I feel that there's still a lot of these localities left on our Earth here that they're becoming fewer and fewer, but still there are enough that could keep us busy for another 100 years or so. And a lot of the mineral collecting, most of the mineral collecting is dependent on recycling, where something comes out of a collection or from somebody and so on. They keep going back and forth and around and around. However, there are factors that are pressing on that probably to some extent give the evaluation a push upward, because there are more people and there are fewer specimens to be found. When the metal, for instance, the metal prices are high, some of the big mines produce fine minerals. If they can be taken out under cover that the money-oriented owners of the property are unaware of, and that is a big factor. The metal prices are going up now, so that could mean that in the next few years, some very fine minerals could appear in some of the major mines in the world. But from my standpoint, I'm just a small guy in a small context of mining small properties looking for rare things. And just to mention a few of those, I think that there are, like the benitoite neptunite property in California is a property that I haven't been there for some time, and it may have been mined out more than I realized, but I feel that there can be some very, very fine specimens still available there. That's one property. I feel that the Tourmaline Queen Mine that I've been an owner of for over 35 years can produce some other things. And I would never want to attempt to believe that we'd get anything as fine as Bill and I found in that blue cap pocket. Still in all, the pegmatite, the thickness of the pegmatite continues, and the dip is revealing that there's an area there underground, not too far from the surface, that could contain a complete area of pockets have never been opened before. And every pocket has a different characteristic depending on the trace elements that are in the solutions. And it could be a purple top or a green top or whatever, but it could be very fine. And I feel it's not too far from the surface. And so that's my desire, to get in and try to dig and do something like that. And believe me, I've dropped a few bucks doing these things, but I still won't give up because it's my real love. Another property, there are several properties I know in Brazil that I think have great possibilities that have been overlooked. And I'd like to, if I still could make it down there, I'm getting really old, but if I could still make it down there, I'd love to go down and try a couple of those. And so there's a place in Turkey for diaspora that I went underground about 70 feet and self-dug some twin crystals of transparent diaspora that were about as fine as I've ever seen. And we didn't really spend too much time digging because we had factors that made us get out of there a little sooner than we wanted to. But I would think that if someone had some connections with the Turkish government, that would be fantastic also. And so there are there are few localities here in the U.S. other than what I've just mentioned that I think have possibilities. And that's my outlook. And I continue to stay in the frame of being a miner, just living in a tunnel or something like that, and I love it. And so I just hope that so long as I'm alive, that good things will be coming out, even though I don't find them myself. Thanks very much.
Okay, so let's go directly to the audience and we are recognizing questions and statements and so on. Maybe Vic.
I have a question for Charlie Key. How many times have you been in jail?
2 times, proud of it, Juarez and Patterson.
Tell us about Juarez.
Okay, next.
Wayne?
Wayne.
What about maybe name a few of the better finds of the 70s? I mean, you guys were involved in them, so you know, the better pockets, mineral finds.
I'm a silver pick collector, not a miner. I don't know.
Let me chip in on that. The Jonas find, I was in Brazil at that time, and for me that was a very big deal and has been so ever since. Jonas tourmalines.
What are the best 4 or 5, Charlie from CIMIB, best 4 or 5 pockets of anything?
That's difficult. There's been a tremendous amount of pockets over the years, but almost certainly a major find of azurites. Got a call from Sid Peters from Windhoek one day and said, "You must come quickly. There's been a big find of azurites." And this particular find was a really huge find by any measure, and included, it was fundamentally large rhombic crystals of azurite, literally to bread loaf size, scattered through a brecciated quartz, and there were literally hundreds of them. And this was in the halcyon days of Perkins Sam's collecting from Houston or Midland, Texas. And I knew it was over my head money-wise, so I called Perkins from Sid Peters' home and described briefly the find, and was sort of going on excessively about how incredible they were, and he sort of interrupted me and said, "Well, what the hell do you want me to do, sell a goddamn oil well?" He rose to the occasion. He funded the find. It was $350,000 in the 70s, which was serious money. And these things got dispersed far and wide. There's a couple pieces in the Houston Museum. I frankly don't know where most of them went. but they were major, and it was an incredible find of the 70s. There were also the gem mimetites from Sumeb, the finest scoridites in the world, period, from Sumeb. Cerusites, many cerusites, the reticulated snowflake cerusites, pink smithsonites, emerald green smiths. I mean, so many things from Sumeb in that period of time were just towering and still represent the world's finest of what they were. Lots of rare things that a lot of people here wouldn't be too keen on, but superstadites and alamosites and leadhillites and rhinerites and rainierites and germanites, on and on. There has just simply never been a place like Sumeb in history, and I'm sure there will never be one of those again. There were other places, Panascara wolframite, for me, Peru, for Hutchinsonite, orpiment, and argites from Kiravilka, the mines up in Pasto Bueno for Hubnerites and rhodochrosites. So many things from the 70s. I guess in some ways they were my golden years for fine mineral specimens, but it's far from finished. Material now is shifted to China, Russia, and it continues to come.
And you can just go right back to Namibia, and because he's was involved in Sumeb, and I got his leavings, but I did get fabulous cuprites from Angania, and we all remember them with the malachite coatings, fabulous find. And then for me, the best was the Schwanning rhodochrosites. I got a phone call in the middle of the night from Jerry Rousseau, and bull, I got the best one. The best one what? The red one, rhodochrosite. Oh, that's right. And so I got on a plane and flew over, and we bought, in those days, between me and Cal Graber, Cal went the next few months. I think we spent $250,000 on 3 different buys, which, like he says, in those days was huge money. But they were distributed, like everybody says, all over the world. It's just amazing. I see them, I recognize them. But I mean, there's so many finds, not just Sumebs, but all over. It's amazing. And of course, Wayne Thompson is another great field collector, and he went through numerous things that he should come up and tell us about. Pete, you had something.
Yeah, a few words about a number of localities that contributed a dream situation to a collector buyer. And that would be in the Minas Gerais area of Brazil. The thrill of being able to walk into a room that somebody you met on the street said, go around the corner and there's a number there, knock on the door and maybe he'll let you in. And when you go in, here's a cabinet absolutely filled with diamond matrices, with tourmaline, phenakite, rare minerals, and you were there by yourself with these things. Francelina Horta in Rio de Janeiro had 3 rooms connected. Maybe each room was only 10 by 20, but a lot of display space, absolutely loaded with kunzites, rose quartz crystals, and tourmaline. And here I am with $10,000. But the thrill of being able to see great quantities of beautiful, outstanding crystals at one time and then go to another store and another store is a thrill that even today would be hard to duplicate.
Charles, how do the best neon tourmalines from Namibia compare with the tourmalines from Paraíba in Brazil?
They don't really. The lower levels of Paraíba are more or less equivalent to the finest levels of Neuschwab and Usicus. But the best of Paraíba is still in a class entirely by itself. And the prices reflect that. I think there's a couple stones here at about 30 grand a carat. Somewhere here on the floor, a 6-carat stone for $30,000 a carat from Paraíba. Namibia never will see the day of $30,000.
That was a long time.
Yeah.
Don't say never.
Well, okay. I can't see it in my limited time. Let's put it. But they do overlap color-wise. Yes.
Steve Smale. I have a quick question for you. We're talking about minerals collected over the last, say, 30-some years. And I know that if we had invested in stocks and bonds, the Standard & Poor's would have returned maybe 11% annualized since that time. So one's investment would have perhaps grown 16 times. On the other hand, if we had invested in fine minerals, can you please tell us what you think that investment would yield today?
I'd like to grab that if I might. Liquidity aside, you would have done much better if you really knew what you were doing in minerals. Liquidity is an issue always in minerals. But if you choose well and hold for a long time and know the business, know the collectors, mineral specimens will serve you better than anything else where you defer your power to a third party.
One other aspect of collecting that you didn't mention, Steve, it isn't the dollar amount that you get something that is in your hand. When you get a piece of paper and it will buy something for you, there's an emotional gratification. But when you hold a beautiful crystal in your hand that's worth a lot of money and getting better all the time, that does something for the heart, and I think that needs to be mentioned.
Yeah.
Jean McKenna calling. I want to know who else besides Charlie has been in jail for what they do.
Not me.
3 times. No. Jeannie can tell you.
I can't speak for other people up here, but I was considered fast of foot when I was on the track team.
Gene.
Next question. How many people of the panel deserve to be in jail?
The high graders. How would you like to hear about the finest specimen I ever saw in my life? I'll tell you a little story about it. I was invited to go to Brazil in November 1980 to view the Jonas Mine large specimens that were discovered. The best one I saw was a 700-pound specimen. It consisted of 2 prisms 10 inches high, 7 inches in diameter, of the finest burgundy red rubellite, sitting right next to each other, separated by 1.5 inches. This was right on top of magnificent white large albite flakes. Then behind this composite was a foot-size semi-gemmy smoky quartz crystal. Never seen anything like it. Someday you will get to see it. It does exist. The specimen is so perfect there isn't even a flea bite on the specimen, let alone a Wilbur. It's the greatest thing I ever saw in my life.
That's good. Yeah.
Thank you.
There are pictures of that specimen, Dave. There are pictures of that. It
But
exists.
you know, it's funny, Bill, nobody's seen this. One of our members out here said they thought for sure this one other one was the finest, but this thing here, most people have never even heard of it or seen it. And every time they say there's pictures of it, it ends up not being this particular specimen. But it's a must that you see this someday. It's unbelievable. I can't say. I know where it is, but I can't say. Thank you.
I got a question about kids, the next generation of collectors. If any of the panelists could talk about how we are going to motivate kids that want to do in the future what you gentlemen have done up to now.
I'll start that one with permission, because I have kids that are trying, and we have a couple guys in the audience, Marcus Auriglieri, James Egris, who are young. They're coming up. They remind me of probably all of us when we were young. So the biggest problem I see is the lack of places to collect. because that's what turned all of us on. I mean, he obviously was in Patterson and places. I was in the dumps of the Queen Mine, dreaming of meeting Ed without even knowing him. So collecting was what turned us all on. So, I mean, every kid that came into my room at the Westward Look today got a free mineral specimen because they don't get anything anymore. We give them tourmalines or quartzes or whatever. And it's the biggest critical problem in our hobby. Mike Scott addressed it last year, maybe somewhat abruptly, because he did it on purpose, trying to shock us, because there are no kids that are really few. And of course, we have a couple of wonderful young ladies here, and we got to go to the next generation that are in our audience. Peter McGaw's a wonderful young lady who can pronounce better than I can Poldervaartheid. So, and she knows what it is. So that is a critical problem, and so anything all of us can do, and obviously the clubs are trying. In Fallbrook, we've had a wonderful, how many people are from Fallbrook here? They asked me to ask that. We have a very, very dynamic museum, thanks to the efforts of many of them in the room here, from Pete Bancroft right through the Grabers, and I mean everybody. It's Walkers, blah, blah. I mean, everybody's really trying there, and anything, I mean, Tucson, I had a young lady ask me for a job today. She's in her 20s, and she wants to work for Jeannie at the Four Seasons collector. And she started in Tucson because of the Tucson Gem Mineral Society allowing her to come to the show. And we, the people in the TGMS are smarter than all the dealers who complain. I've never complained about the kids coming in there on Fridays. And she came to us because of that directly, and graduated from GIA recently. So if anybody else has got an idea, but I mean, we got to do more.
I would like to suggest something. Let's take the Tucson Gem and Mineral Society. If we were to interview everybody who attends that show, non-collectors, non-people that are familiar with the mineral specimen, let's just say the raw public, that are curious about what's going on in the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. They know nothing about it, but they heard that there's very pretty gemstones. They might know something about that. But what are these rocks they're talking about? After they go through the show, come out the door, if there was somebody interviewing all these people, how many do you think went through that show and understand that mineral specimens are magnificent, beautiful, natural crystals that come out of the ground that were not cut or polished, found basically as is, other than trimming? How many do you think would understand that? Very, very few. When I was a dealer at a booth, most people would come up to the booth and look at my items, would say, how did they cut that? How did they polish that? Some people insisted that it was cut and polished by man. We must reach the general public and teach them what they are looking at in the exhibits, that these are created by nature. Man did not create these minerals. They're created in the ground, and they are natural. And you'd be surprised how many more people get turned on with those specimens, the fact that they are magnificent colors and natural colors, natural crystal forms, transparencies. If we did that and teach these people more about crystals. I taught a lot of kids. In fact, I'm one of the mentors to Joe Barch. I took him up to his case and I told him about his specimens, which ones were the good ones, which ones were the average ones, which ones had damage, that you can get the same thing if you work a little harder at it from different dealers. If you shop around and compare all different minerals, a lot of people say minerals are too high priced today. Yes, we have a whole new plateau of prices with minerals, but believe it or not, there's a lot of minerals, and I've seen hundreds of minerals at a very good price at the show. We still have the general fine minerals that are affordable, and there's still many, many minerals kids can actually afford. Believe it or not, you have to shop. Never in the history of mineralogy did we have so many minerals available to choose from, but we're not reaching the people properly. We have to start teaching our kids more about what minerals really are. Don't get too technical in the beginning, and take them to the gem and mineral shows, take them to the museums to study the collections instead of letting the kids run out and go to bars and dances and all this horrible stuff that's going on and all the horrible stuff that's on television. We got to train our kids what to do.
I'm aghast. One thing I did want to bring up that I had forgotten earlier, that it would be, I think, and will be a great help in bringing to the attention of, let's call it the general public, the excitement of collecting minerals are the documentaries that more recently, like in the, I think it's the Sundance Festival in Utah, they were the top of the show, and they're all about natural, real things rather than fiction, and I feel that there's an area here that has been unexplored that will bring to the attention of people in a very professional manner, the excitement of the search, like hunting for treasure, which is kind of what I'm into. And so that could be a factor in the future of bringing it more to the attention of the public. Thank you.
Question over here.
My name is Joe Freilich, and I have an idea. Boy, did I get into trouble last time I said that. You 6 gentlemen are the senators of the mineral business. Why don't you get together and write an autobiographical work, 20 pages each, to leave something for future generations to know what your experience has been and how great you are?
And I'll put up the publishing money. Ed's on page 248, he just told me.
No, I think seriously, you have so much to share with future generations. It would be a shame to have all that knowledge and experience just disappear. So it would be great if you could do that. Just 20 pages each, it all would take.
Compare the Tucson experience from the 70s and now. In the 70s in the Desert Inn, it seemed like at 1 o'clock in the morning you could still just barely walk down the hall. You could walk into any room and either find people buying minerals or playing poker.
We were younger.
The show has gotten so large as there's so much to cover, it's humanly impossible for the average person to get to see everything that's available. It really is spread out, and it's making it very difficult. What you have to do is just, if you have specific things that you're looking for your collection, you have to go to certain main mineral part of the shows. If you're looking for gems shows, they have those. So you have to be more selective of what you're looking for and more selective of where you're going to go. You have to make plans in the future, because this hobby is so large now, it's just really too much to see. Never in the history has there been so many fine gemstones and fine minerals available of all different types.
Can I ask a question? So I got into the hobby through the club circuit. I was pathetic. I collected fossils. I mean, it's really embarrassing. I admit it. I started with fossils. I don't do it anymore, but, and then, yeah. And then the only
Rob, are you saying you're a fossil already?
No. So the only reason I got into the hobby is because Carl Davis found me collecting fossils and brought me at age 12 into the Columbus Rock and Mineral Society.
That was a 12-step program.
where John Jazak was actually a few years my senior, and we were the only people under the age of 50 in the club. And John Medici took me on my first field collecting trip where I lost my boot in the mud and pissed my mom off. And, and the rest was history, and wow, wasn't that bad. And so collecting, like Bill said, is part of it, but, I grew up in the Midwest. We had, it's dolomite quarries and, boring fluorites and colorless calcites and some yellow ones and fossils. And, what inspired me to know what a fine mineral was Pete Bancroft's book, Gem and Crystal Treasures, when I stumbled upon it in the club library. And I meet so many new customers on the internet every day. I try and sell them MRs. You know, they think, well, it's a waste of money. Some of them buy it eventually, and they get inspired. But there's nothing for me as inspiring as that book was. And I try and find copies to give it to people, you know, new customers. It's not out there. Can someone reprint that book? That is something that I think would be a good, you know, project to put money behind, because there isn't another way to convey the history and I think the excitement of these great finds as well as that book did, at least for me.
Get a
Both
reprint.
Hi, this is Bernadine, and I know a lot of you here. I know this is going to be shocking to most of you, but there are females involved in this. You know, and I think it would be very nice if some of them sometimes were acknowledged. What about the Josie Scripps, the Kareth Grabers? There's a lot of females involved in this, and I think it'd be nice to kind of push them to the forward just a little bit. We need to involve the young girls coming up. The little girls need to know they can go out and dig, and it's just as exciting for a little girl to take a crystal out of the ground as it is for a little boy. And we need to kind of push that, okay? Okay, go girl!
Panelist female. We have room for you up here, my dear.
My name is Ralph Wetmore, and I know that my wife would never say anything. She's the assistant curator of the Mineral Museum at the University of Arizona. Right now at the Flandroff Science Center at the University of Arizona campus, there is a most beautiful display of faceted gems and the raw stones on display. A lot of them from Gene Myron, Bill Larson, the Harvard collection. That's an absolutely magnificent display that the kids would just love. That would be a good place to get kids excited about minerals and gems.
Here, here. You got one way back.
Way back there.
So, Charlie, what's the word on this new dioptase?
I suppose this is as good a time as any. Well, the short version is there has been a new find of dioptase up in the northern Kokefeld. Not that dioptase hasn't been found up there before and even mined up there before, but a number of showings have been opened up in the region of about 80 miles north of Sesfontein, to be precise. It is a very remote, beyond the fences area, and it is being developed by Herero and Himba diggers who live in the area and consider that area theirs. I happen to be working with a South African come Namibian who has put what they call an EPL, which is an exclusive prospecting license, over 20 square kilometers of these showings, which essentially says the government gives us 3 years to do anything we want to develop a mineral deposit there. But the Hereros and Himbas pretty much say it's ours and you can bugger off. The guy I'm working with has an ex-South African Army attitude. He is what they call a kufut. And a kufut in Afrikaans translates as a crowbar. He did 11 years of bush war up in Angola, and he has his ideas on how to get the Himbas and Hereros off the place. I advise him urgently not to do that. But the reality is dioptase have been found there, most of which, by the way, in their collecting have been destroyed. But nonetheless, crystals to 6 centimeters, doubly terminated, extraordinary quality. Every color range you could find in dioptase, from light medium green through dark almost black, brilliant to transparent to gem, many of which are sitting on botryoidal crusts of planchiite of a light powder blue. They can be extraordinary, but they're being destroyed faster than they're being saved. At some point, however, the diggers are going to essentially block themselves or kill themselves in the process. And when their ardor cools, I have reason to believe we might be able to go in with equipment. We tried that early in November. I was up in November and December. And by the way, this area is probably about as remote as you get in Africa. It is literally beyond the fences. There's no fences, there's no beer cans. This is empty country. And everything drops back a few centuries when you go up there. It's extraordinarily beautiful. The potential in this area is enormous. There's many showings, actually, several of which have been opened considerably. In time, I think we will see the world's best dioptase from this area, but we're not quite there yet.
I think perhaps it's time to bring the meeting to a close. Maybe thank the speakers and ask Dave Waisman to conclude.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Did they do a great job? Thank all of you. It was really good. Very interesting. Well, that concludes our program for tonight and this year. The show still goes on, though, for 2 more days. We're in buildings 20 through 23, a short walk from here. I think that's it. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next year.